I'm very happy and grateful to be here. I promise to start with a joke that the talk bears no relation whatsoever to Peter Urban or his particular aesthetic preferences. So we have a focus on things that are actually outside our windows at the moment. So really appreciate the location as well, that we can actually just turn our heads and enjoy the urban aesthetics of Prague here today. But my talk today will be about urban aesthetics in general. This is an area in which I have been working for the past 15 years or so, since the beginning of my doctoral project and then continuing to doctoral work and so on. And my way of characterizing this particular subfield in aesthetics always kind of follows the idea that urban aesthetics is a lens, it's a way of bringing together the approaches in environmental philosophy and in philosophy of technology. Of course, other areas are also important and interesting, but we are dealing in urban environments with things that are brought here by human intentionality, by human design, but then there are also facets in urban life, in urban environments that are not in our power, not something that we can control or design. And this kind of friction is something that characterizes urban aesthetics to a large extent. This will be the outline of my talk. So first, I hope you can see the text might be a little bit small, but I will be talking all the things that will be on the slides. So at first, I give a little bit of motivation. Why do we need to look into urban aesthetics in particular? And then some background. Where does this particular approach stem from? What are the ideas behind the scenes, so to say? And then I move to describing a current paradigm in urban aesthetics. And this is something that I've been working mainly in recent years. Of course, some other particularities as well, but like how to characterize the study, the philosophical study of urban aesthetics. And then in the end, I will give some examples of how we can apply these approaches, how we can go into particular cases, case studies. I do that through my own recent publications. I hope they are of interest, but I will also present some of my colleagues who actually come mainly now from the philosophy of the city research group circles. So people work on urban aesthetics also in that very, very interesting and vibrant community. And with the applications, we also touch upon the future directions of the field. And yeah, if in the end of the talk you have any interest, if this somehow links to your work, I'm very, very happy to hear comments and questions and your ideas about urban aesthetics and what it could be. So motivation, I think this is something that we all kind of are familiar with already. So the parallel processes of urbanization, growth of human population, and very kind of grave conditions for this are taking place at the moment. I mentioned here climate change, but it's only one of the major problems that we have worldwide in a way. Already, over half of the human population lives in urban areas globally, and by 2030, the urban population will be close to 5 billion. So this already gives us a lot of motivation to study the effects of urbanization. They do not concern only human life on Earth, but also other species well beyond our intentions and conditions. But in order to study cities, like we can have several different kinds of approaches. But to me, of course, coming from the field of aesthetics, understanding human aesthetic preferences and values related to urban environments are really, really of interest. And they also kind of provide us a way of understanding other values. And that is, I can already tell, that is like the red thread in my talk, that aesthetics is a vehicle, it's a way to also grasp other values and how we kind of make them perceivable. So if we start with the urban life world, and this is a concept that I find particularly useful, it is familiar, of course, from the context of phenomenology, but also something that has been used in sociological studies of urban life also. With the idea of urban life world, we do not focus only on the material conditions, but also the social structures, the interrelations between different facets of urban life, what there is in the city to be perceived in the first place. And I also want to emphasize that we very easily tend to think in terms of Western cities and Eurocentric cities even, what kind of aesthetic ideals do we have about what does our preferred city look like? And I'd like to keep it very open, that cities globally have very different qualities, but also our aesthetic preferences when it comes to cities can be very different. So we are somehow dealing with the urban life world, and in aesthetics particular, with senses, with sensory information, sensory, in a way, knowledges. Also, it's a way of kind of showing how imagination is part of urban experiences, how we make sense of the urban life world, how our memories and emotions also have an effect on how we experience and what we value. But we also have to take into consideration the social and political factors. They determine aesthetic values. We are not only individuals. Aesthetic taste is not purely subjective, although that is a very intuitive idea, that beauty is always in the eyes of the beholder. It is also that, but we also are very, very much directed in our taste, in our preferences by communities, diverse communities, which we are a part of, by taste that kind of develops as part of our experiences when they accumulate, and trends. So there is also change in aesthetic preferences. City is always, as a location of study, it's characterized by diversity, by constant change. Things are always in motion. We only have to walk to the street and we understand this on many different levels. There's a great variety in the amount and quality of stimuli in the lived environment, so a lot of things happening. And this can be, and has actually in the history of kind of urban studies been also criticized, that cities are like too overwhelming for our senses, and cities for some time were considered to be like a necessary evil, like a byproduct of industrialization, something which would and could not provide an interesting or livable environment for human beings. But on the other hand, cities have always been also places of fascination, of really kind of something that energizes humans through precisely this variation and amount of stimuli. But then we cannot also like overlook the questions of who can use a city. So whose city are we talking about? Who is this subject of the aesthetic experience that I will be also talking about? What kind of uses are actively or passively prevented by urban design, for example? This is becoming an increasingly important question, and also points towards the idea that urban aesthetics is not innocent in that sense. So what we sense, what we perceive, how we evaluate that already points towards certain usages, and also things that we cannot find in the city tell a lot about the existing values of the community. So yeah, I promised to briefly mention also philosophy of the city. It's a very interesting and important context for urban aesthetics. It offers, in a way, this kind of multi-inter-transdisciplinary context for studying aesthetic values, aesthetic experiences in the urban context. And this is really just a short introduction into philosophy of the city. If you are not familiar with this branch, it's to some extent now kind of you can find philosophy of the city done in the context of our research group. I'm a member of a co-director in the board, but of course as a branch of philosophy, as a sub-branch of applied philosophy, you can find it in many places. And the idea behind this approach has been to kind of somehow respond to the criticism that cities have been a blind spot in the context of 20th century environmental philosophy. This is something that has come up especially by, from Andrew Light in 2001. I think he was one of the early environmental philosophers to really address the problem of cities from the environmental philosophy point of view. But it has also become a very kind of positive, vibrant, very kind of free context for bridging different approaches within philosophy. So there is this interdisciplinary approach, but then also this intradisciplinary focus within philosophy of the city. So if we have in our under our attention cities as philosophical questions, we most likely need all these different kinds of approaches to kind of solve the problems or to answer the questions that we might have. And aesthetics in this context is one of the approaches, which is, in my opinion, of course I'm a bit biased, but it can be very useful in making visible ethical problems in cities, social, political problems, and whatever you might find. And yeah, so then we come to aesthetics. I'd actually like to ask from the audience, I'm not going to ask any details, but how many of you are would feel comfortable using the word aesthetics in your everyday talk with your friends? Would you use the word aesthetics with like comfort? You can mean all different kinds of things by that. I'm not asking for a definition. Because I think aesthetics is quite a loaded word. You can mean a variety of different approaches by it. So I want to make clear what I mean by aesthetics, and in the particular context of urban aesthetics as a philosophical field and approach. So this links to some developments, especially within environmental aesthetics, in everyday aesthetics that have taken place in the past, I would say, 50 years or so, everyday aesthetics more prominently since the late 90s. And the idea behind these very kind of applied approaches in aesthetics has been to return to the original definition of the discipline of aesthetics. So Baumgartenian definition for aesthesis and aesthetics, especially as the science of sensitive cognition. So this really basically means that we are not interested only in art, and in the urban context this would mean public art, which is a very important and interesting topic in itself, but it represents only one domain of interest for urban aesthetics. So first of all, there is interest in the realm of multisensory experiences. So it's not visual only either, but we really try to focus on how different senses contribute to the urban aesthetic experience. But if we would stay only on the level of sensory experiences, we might be coming from perceptual psychology or something like that. We are philosophers, we are ultimately interested in how these experiences and perceptions are linked to human values. So how we make and give meanings in the urban context for the things that we sense and perceive. And art, of course, it's one domain of interest, but this is like a step back from the Hegelian definition for aesthetics as kind of narrowing it into philosophy of art. Instead, we are open to all that there is to be experienced. And as you can already understand, this opens a lot of doors for like topics that you can study under the title of urban aesthetics. I also always propose a scale model of aesthetic value. This is a very kind of useful trick for thinking about aesthetics. Aesthetic in itself is not necessarily a positive, doesn't refer to only aesthetically positive qualities. So we are not only discussing or equating aesthetics with beauty. Beauty is one aesthetic quality, but we can also be interested in ugliness, in repulsiveness, in something simply being like interesting for our senses in the urban environment. And the scale model means that beauty and ugliness, they are not perceived as opposites, but they are actually on the one side, and what is on the other side of the kind of sliding scale, if there exists one, that would be maybe something that doesn't even gain our attention, something that we don't pay conscious attention to. And there are also those kinds of things, of course, in the city. And this kind of resonates with recent emphasis in aesthetics and other philosophical fields on attention as a topic. So there are a lot of things kind of fighting for our attention in cities. Based on our personal experiences, we might be noticing certain things, and our friend might be noticing completely other types of things. And I think this also creates a lot of variety between subjective experiences in cities. And in my personal opinion, I think this comes with the profession. Beauty is one facet, aesthetic beauty in particular, but to be honest, I find ugliness often much more interesting, or even in the urban context. So we get into much more kind of complex grounds when something is perceived as ugly. And aesthetics, in any case, it's not only about the surface qualities. We are not dealing with facade aesthetics. That is one dimension. But we're trying to get beyond those immediate sensory perceptions. So we are interested in deeper meaning-making processes and the kind of ensuing values and what we make out of those values. And this is sometimes referred to as the thin and thick sense of aesthetics. This distinction comes from John Hospers in philosophy of art, but was applied to environmental philosophy by Alan Carlson. And as a motivation, further motivation, but also as a kind of definition maybe for aesthetics, it's an important part of creating quality of life for people and of human well-being. And Arto Haapala has been writing more about this particular topic, how aesthetics contributes to human well-being. So if we move now more closer to urban aesthetics, how we can approach this obviously quite broad field is that we try to zoom into how the look and feel of a city is studied from the experiential perspective. So again, not only visual experiences, but the feel, the atmosphere, the kind of when you just grasp a place somehow, and it kind of touches you and makes you imagine, makes you dream, gives you some kinds of emotions and interesting ideas. And another distinction that is especially useful in the context of urban aesthetics would be the descriptive normative aesthetics distinction. So in urban aesthetics, we can easily imagine just by reading tourist books or like introductions into cities, the descriptive side, that there might be like just somehow like following like what there is in the first place, not necessarily saying if it's good or bad, if it's beautiful or ugly. And then the normative side, in a way, tries to already go deeper into explaining, finding arguments for why something should be there. And this distinction maybe helps to kind of already see a little bit where in research, for example, where we are working. So I see both sides useful, and I also see that it's very actually difficult to make exact distinctions between the descriptive and normative, but in some cases it can be very, very helpful. And when Mark mentioned, for example, that I have been working as a consultant in these fields, I tend to go somehow, the processes move from descriptive to normative, but you have to kind of base your ideas why cities should be developed into certain directions and kind of deal and discuss with several stakeholders, like who the changes will affect. So when it comes to aesthetic values, we discuss what is considered to be beautiful, ugly, interesting, important. There are like a variety of different qualities, basically the adjectives that you can use to describe a place in a city. So you can imagine that there is a lot of vocabulary that could be used here, and interestingly, the vocabulary also develops and changes all the time. One of my favorite new development that kind of I discuss with my students is that when we talk about vibes, like certain city, like an environment has a certain vibe to it, and it's like it's not exactly same as the atmosphere necessarily, but it has like just a certain feel. And when you talk with your friends, they also grasp, but it can be very difficult to pinpoint what creates a vibe in an urban area. And we can come to quite closer to analyzing urban aesthetic experiences also by focusing on different roles and interests of the experiencer. I don't like the word experiencer, but like that is sometimes very useful to explain this. So we can zoom on the tourist gaze. For me, for example, it's the first time in Prague, so I have maybe certain expectations. My attention goes to certain landmark monuments and so on, so I'm very kind of easily distracted by things here. But if I would live here, I most likely would really pay attention to very different things, and they all kind of can belong to the category of aesthetic experiences. And also like professional view. So if an urban planner, if an architect looks at the city through the professional lenses, those ideas are also very, very valuable, but can point to very different directions sometimes. And this is where conflicts also get born. A little bit about the philosophical background. Besides philosophy of the city that I already presented a little, the recent developments, I would say since 1995 onwards or so in urban aesthetics they stem from cognitive and non-cognitive approaches to environmental aesthetics, everyday aesthetics, phenomenology, a little bit different branches depending on who is writing about urban issues. Pragmatism has been very influential also through developments in both environmental and everyday aesthetics. Post-phenomenological philosophy of technology, I have been especially kind of trying to link those views into urban aesthetics, and then the aforementioned philosophy of the city, which is more like an umbrella term for many, many different kinds of approaches. Now we go into the kind of framework, and this work I have done during the past years in order to kind of make sense of everything that has been written about urban aesthetics, trying to go even beyond the disciplinary boundaries of philosophy in understanding how urban planners have used the word aesthetics whenever they use it, or architects, and like into what kind of directions these ways of using the words simply point towards, how we can make sense of this kind of very, very muddy field in a way, make it clearer for further study. And I like to like use this division or distinction into three different dimensions or layers of urban aesthetics. And the first one, I think this is what is very intuitively grasped about urban aesthetics. So that may be a bit clumsy term, macro aesthetic layer simply refers to those ideas that we enjoy cityscapes, we enjoy beautiful facade buildings, we somehow focus on the visual emphasis of an urban environment. This is when we pay a lot of attention to these surface and formal qualities, and also very kind of instant impressions of a new place, for example. So this is linked to the tourist approach of coming to a city for the first time. It's often somewhat distanced from the city as a location itself. And we maybe pay more attention to landmarks, different monuments, cityscapes, recognizable features. I like to use as examples the cityscape of New York City. It's something that almost everyone at least from the Western cultural sphere recognizes immediately. So we have already a lot of ideas that we kind of attach to that image, even as a photo. Or the city of Paris, the Eiffel Tower, such an emblematic place in the city that everyone who has ever heard about Paris most likely recognizes. And then linking it to the next layer, when we are like here we are looking at the object or the kind of cityscape from afar, we try to link this into towards more everyday experiences. But if you look from the aesthetic theory, from everyday aesthetics, this kind of dimension of urban aesthetics is linked to extraordinary experiences, so something that kind of breaks or is not part of our everyday understanding of our life in the city. And art can also be part of this, very, very often is a part of this, but art actually is something that goes through all of these different dimensions or layers of urban aesthetics, so it can have different functions, even the same works of art. And the other dimension, when we actually zoom closer into the city and into these everyday experiences, I've titled that micro-aesthetic layer. We are somehow closer to the object of study or the environment of our study, or like trying to understand the implicit and explicit experiences that everyday life kind of brings to us in the urban environment. And although there is always a strong visual emphasis for us as human beings, there is more emphasis maybe on multisensory experiences. We are on the streets, we are walking, we are maybe in motion, we are not discussing cities through images, which is also one possibility with the previous layer. We are actually kind of engaged, taking part in the urban processes. So other senses, you can imagine going to a city where there is a particular smell, or you can feel the cobblestone below your feet. All these kinds of experiences come into play. But yeah, this is something that links to everyday aesthetic understanding of how we also use city. It's not there only to be perceived as pretty or ugly or anything beyond that, but it really becomes experienced in the context of everyday routines, everyday rhythms, everyday activities that characterize our life in the city. And I think this is very important because this is a way of approaching those very, very kind of even the most implicit aesthetic experiences, something that you might face on a daily basis might be a very kind of minor detail in the city, but when you see it on a daily basis, it actually starts accumulating. You are maybe kind of noticing things for the first time only when you pass them for 50 times or so on. So this opens a lot of possibilities that are not necessarily there for the kind of more grand scheme of aesthetics. So this distinction that comes from everyday aesthetics is very useful for analyzing these kinds of phenomena. So the ordinary, extraordinary, this would also, of course, kind of go towards the ordinary experiences, or like things that we consider ordinary, even too mundane to be aesthetically appreciated, yet they have an effect on us. This is one kind of claim that I always make in my work. And this is why we should be talking about the living environments, the neighborhoods, the suburban kind of living conditions for people. Even though we wouldn't be interested in how they look or feel, it still affects us if we live there. And then another distinction is linked to ordinary, extraordinary, but also useful here is familiarity and strangeness. So how these kinds of things kind of fluctuate in our experience. And in the context of very, very familiar, your own blog, for example, you think you know everything in it, but there are always strange things, always new things coming up for your experience as well. So it's this kind of fluctuation between what you already know, what you can expect, but then something that penetrates the experience also all of a sudden or more subtly. And in this context, like the same artwork that can be faced by a tourist as a kind of grand scheme of aesthetics, something obvious for your aesthetic appreciation, the same work of art in the urban context can also become significant in the flux of everyday life. Like for example, I always think in my own personal life there is one very kind of strange monument, like a statue put to a square, and I pass it daily, at least twice a day, and it kind of becomes part of my everyday life and routines. And sometimes I think of it, sometimes I look at it, but most of the times I just pass by, yet it's still there. It somehow creates the aesthetic kind of undertone for my everyday life. And this is a term that we have used with Vesa Vihaninjoki in some of our articles. So it's kind of what there is. We might pay attention, we might not even notice, but it creates the atmospheric factors maybe. And this one is still in a way work in progress to some extent. Oh, sorry. But something that I have been kind of going towards, because the macro and micro, that is something that is quite clearly found in research literature. Like you can make the distinction and kind of make like almost like group texts on urban aesthetics based on that division. But it seems that there is something more for us to experience. And also we need to link what is the connection between the macro and micro dimension. It's never either or our experience. It's most likely like we zoom in, we zoom out, we see the big picture, but then there are a lot of things that, even for tourists, that like small details that we might pay attention to and so on. And it's a work in progress in a way. I titled it Experiencing Urban Complexity, but to me it's somehow related to the kind of many intertwined complex ways of functioning of contemporary cities. So, and I'm not only referring to the megalopolises of our current century. I think it's something scalable, this experience of urban complexity. It's a product of many interlinked processes, and we are always engaged somehow bodily out there. To just name traffic as an example, we are participating. We need to kind of somehow make sense of the many signals of the cars. Also, when we are using transportation methods, for example, a topic that I discussed in Japan last summer, it's a way of experiencing the city in itself. So we see a different city or different facets of the city when we are driving a car, or when we are walking, or when we are taking public transportation. It enables different things for our experience. But this could be a possible way of explaining also differences between 21st century cities globally. I just wanted to mention, again, remind that we don't go into these two Western Eurocentric ideas that cities are always somehow product of certain time or age, or function in a certain, to us, logical way. There's a very interesting book on messy urbanism in the context of East Asian cities, which kind of describes the logic of cities being born from very kind of different conditions with a very different logic than what we are used to, and that can really have those kinds of aesthetic experiences or enable aesthetic experiences that wouldn't be possible in any other place. But when it comes to this like terrain of experiencing urban complexity, I think it's fair to say that this could be a way of grasping more closely the temporal dimensions of urban life. So not only are we always experiencing the city on this kind of temporal continuum, the experience is never like just single take and then we move along or like live our life further, but it's something that kind of surrounds and we are enveloped by the city in a way, so it kind of keeps continuing. And of course, the temporal dimension also refers to the fact that if we discuss the macro aesthetic dimension, cities are evolving, developing, there's always some renovation going on. which in my opinion, it's actually quite funny that we always think that renovation or maintenance activities in cities, they are temporary, when actually it's something that really characterizes the city. There's always something going on. It just changes place and the city is never ready. That is something very, very much like Achille Varsi has written, the city is always like a process, and we have to grasp the process nature somehow. So we can maybe get closer to understanding also the systemic level of a city, which is like maybe goes, we usually think that it goes beyond the experiential perceptual sphere, but we can get glimpses of that. By simply taking the metro, we get a glimpse of how the city as a system works, or how this particular infrastructures or transportation methods work, even though we can never perceptually grasp the entirety of the system. But we can get like some ideas, and I use the word that the complexity of the urban system, it kind of seeps into our everyday experience through these manifestations. So from our experience of the metro, we can just grasp, and with the combination of looking at the map, that the system is vast and we can never grasp nothing else but just a tiny bit of it at the same time. So this kind of experience of awe, or like feeling even like small in the face of the magnitude or the systemic nature of the city, I have termed that through the concept of the urban sublime. I find it very useful. The sublime in itself is a very traditional concept in aesthetics. Again, I'd like to ask if you could use the word sublime naturally, like easily in your everyday conversations. All the time. Actually, I'm
not in this sense.
Not, but in general, yeah.
Like people say, for instance, that drink is sublime or something, which is not Berg or Kant.
Yeah. Yeah, it again has like a variety of different uses, and I like to always just observe. I'm not saying that anything would be like more right than other version, but I see that it's less used than in like aesthetics. I've done this same survey many times, and always with the same result. But the sublime, like kind of knowing, recognizing that it has some aesthetic, heavy philosophical baggage to it, it's also very useful. Some facets of it are very useful. And we just had an article coming out with Britt Strandhagen from NTNU in Norway and Matti Tainio from the University of Lapland on this topic. So Britt basically went through some like the traditional ideas, Edmund Burke, Immanuel Kant, and then we came towards like the kind of newer, very useful definitions for the sublime, mainly through the notions of technological sublime and urban sublime, which have both been used already before this, but we like to like really apply it to urban aesthetics in the new sense. So we found that this could be one way of explaining those instances that have very kind of distinct aesthetic dimension to them, but which are not simply explainable by the traditional conceptualizations of urban aesthetics. Just briefly before I go to the examples, I think I'm supposed to move towards the end of my talk soon, but I really want to emphasize this point. And when I in the beginning said that the main red thread of the talk is in a way that aesthetic values make other values perceivable. So we really want to zoom a little bit more to aesthetic values, how we discuss them, how we kind of try to handle them in urban aesthetics. I also reminding the kind of background in environmental aesthetics, a very kind of pragmatist originating ideas of aesthetic experience as a form of engagement. So somehow being bodily, not only bodily present, multisensually present, but also present as a citizen, as an active agent in the urban activities, but also sometimes like kind of losing your power. You know, when you're part of the group of people proceeding on the streets, you don't always kind of feel that you're fully in control of these experiences either. And urban aesthetics, how all these three different levels, what is kind of common to them in a way, and the ensuing experiences of those places, those facets of cities that we kind of feel and see. We can say, I've been stating this in a recent article of mine, that it's characterized by compromise and imperfection. And I mean that this on many different levels. It's if we look at cities as architectural constellations of things designed by humans, or if we look at specific aesthetic features that have been planned and designed, even among those, there's always some kind of compromise going on. If we look at the inter- or transgenerational perspective, like we are always living with the remnants of previous generations, we have to somehow make sense of them. It might be through changing the city radically, it might be by preservation, by conservation, but it's something that we need to deal with. We don't necessarily have a say. We cannot build our cities from the scratch unless we play a video game or something, then it might be possible. But then also the ensuing experiences are kind of characterized by this sort of compromise and imperfection. We have to live with other people. We have to also kind of follow the ideas that others have put forward. We don't always agree with the ideas or with the kind of concrete formations that come up in our neighborhoods. And it's this kind of very contested area in itself. And this actually links to very recent discussions in the Finnish context. I have been kind of participating, sometimes a bit against my will, because it's a very like flammable terrain, like the kind of fight between traditionalists in architecture and then the preservationists, and then like people who would like to have like more diversity in architectural styles, for example. And this is something that how to live, actually aesthetics can be a way of understanding how to live together with very differing values. So it's sometimes like an easy way of entering some very difficult discussions about differing political values or differing ideas about what good life is in general. So it's not as innocent as it looks like. Aesthetics is like one thing that I always want to emphasize with my students is that aesthetics is very often considered to be this kind of cherry on top value, that you can think about aesthetic things, about beauty, when everything else is in place. No, I don't think it goes like that. I think it's really ingrained in what it means to be human, what it means to live a good life, what it means to kind of come together with others and support, and also like kind of live with differing opinions. But this kind of imperfection and this kind of tolerance towards diversity is very, very much like central in the current discussions around how to develop cities. And I guess it's not only in the Finnish context, but more broadly. And aesthetic appreciation, besides the sensory knowledge, perceptual knowledge, also requires having quite a lot of knowledge about the processes that produce and maintain these aesthetic features in cities. So we might take a simple example that actually links to philosophy of art very closely. If we look at a building and we recognize the architectural style, if we even know the architect, if we know the material which is used in its building, the more information we have, or like I was kindly given some insight into this area when we entered the building, like about the events that took place in front of the building, and all that kind of adds to my perception of the space. It's something that I link to my immediate perceptions, and we humans do that by our very nature. There is like the pure perception is maybe an illusion, like it's something that we already tie a lot of interpretations into when we are as we are perceiving. And this is an idea that very, very closely follows some ideas in more general environmental aesthetics. So urban aesthetics is part of environmental aesthetics, but really focuses on the urban environments. And this in itself brings focus to very kind of different questions. And questions, in a way, the kind of Kantian ideas of aesthetic as a disinterested domain, that we, in a way, should somehow only put value on aesthetics and leave other values somehow, at least momentarily, like outside our aesthetic judgment. So we can maybe claim that it's technically, it's like somehow in theory possible to distinguish between aesthetic value and treat them separately, but as we are living in the hustle and bustle of the city, I really kind of say that it's a very useful way of understanding that we are all the time affected by the knowledge, by the other information that we receive about the things that we are perceiving. So aesthetic values in the urban environment, they are linked to other values, ecological, ethical, economic, you name it, what else we read. For example, from buildings, we can deduce a lot of the kind of social structures behind its construction, who are the people living in it, who are the people using certain areas. These kinds of things are easily read and kind of make us maybe interpret places in a different way, whether we are accepted, whether we can use the street, whether it's safer to go by car and so on. And one term that is linked to this understanding of aesthetic values as very interrelated with other values, it comes from Cheryl Foster, from landscape ecology, aesthetic disillusionment, that actually has its origin already in Immanuel Kant's philosophy, and kind of referring to the moment when we receive some kind of new information of the object of our appreciation. So, for example, if we appreciate a certain building style very much, and then we learn that it's actually super energy, like wasteful to build it, to use the material, we might still appreciate it aesthetically, but it starts eroding our appreciation slightly if we are really thinking about the ecological side, as we should. So here you can see how the normative side is entering into our perceptions and kind of aesthetic values. This is something I claim in my work, and others have done as well, that they start slightly changing. Sometimes they can change overnight, like you can really like see an immediate change, something that you perceived as beautiful, like really starts like looking ugly when you know what is going on behind the scenes. What are the costs for environment, what are the costs for other people, for social justice, for example. But sometimes it takes longer time, and it can take even generations. And this is that change, this temporal processes is like now in the center of my current research projects more. So it's still a very much work in progress in a way. But we can say that aesthetic experiences in the urban context, although they are very often immediate, there is that side, very much so. We tend to somehow function based on this sort of informed aesthetic judgment also, that we already know, especially if it's a familiar environment. We have more and more detailed information about what is there and why does it look the way it does, and why is it the way it is. So now I go into some concrete examples, just a few more minutes if I have time. These are from current research collaborations. I'm very kind of excited always to talk about 5G aesthetics. It still makes me like smile a little bit, I think. Coming from the humanities, from philosophy, from art studies, talk about 5G was a stretch. But it actually started as a kind of spin-off project from my ERC starting grant proposal, which didn't get funded in the end, but got to the final round. And I proposed this idea of studying aesthetics of new urban technologies, and 5G was one of the examples. Yeah, I didn't really know a lot about what it would entail, but I had a hunch. Sometimes it's good to follow your hunch. So in the end, we collaborated with Delfina Fantini van Ditmar from the Royal College of Art. She's a design researcher and got really excited on the topic. She's been working with smart technologies, both in the home context, smart home, but smart city as well. And we organized a workshop as part of the London Design Week in 21, in the middle of the deep pandemic. It was supposed to be on site. We were supposed to go on location to see these 5G structures, the small cell towers, all the supporting systems and edifices that you need in order to enable 5G, which in London are, and in many other cities, are very visible. But like in London, we would have kind of traced those back. But ultimately, it was an online workshop. We worked based on photos, and we were able to kind of, we like first had like a lecture part, and then the second part of the workshop was focusing on reimagining these new infrastructures, and really kind of going beyond the current paradigm of thinking about how to implement, how to install structures and like kind of elements that are needed in order to enable 5G or 6G, as I learned, most likely will be the next step immediately. And yeah, after the very interesting and fruitful workshop, we then collected. We also had like another part of like a round table that you can actually find online, with these experts who then also contributed to an edited volume or edited dossier in Mediapolis Journal of Cities and Culture, with kind of very interdisciplinary approach to urban cultures, cities. And yeah, we named it The Rise of 5G. And with 5G aesthetics, like you could focus on what 5G as a technology kind of enables. So you can maybe use entertainment, you can stream videos in the bus, or you can like really somehow have more profound cultural experiences. You could use VR and AR for urban design, or like somehow for urban art purposes. super interesting, super important kind of insights in that direction. But we really went to the kind of root. What are the methods of enabling these technologies? So we were really interested in like how does it make the city change, like the immediate change in cities, and what kind of structures are needed. So we did a lot of that kind of research. And if I just briefly go through the main insights. In the US, it's very common to like use camouflaging tactics. So people send us images of these small cell towers or antennas that were masked as something else. So you might have seen images of like palm trees or trees which are actually like fully technological systems, but just like masked to look like trees. Or they were painted with the same color as the wall, or you could even see like this brick color painted onto the structures. Whereas in Europe, we tend to make things like more visible, that you can actually see and trace that this is a new addition. It might come from our conservation like kind of practices and principles, that like it's not about hiding the technology, but at the same time it has to be replaceable. Like it most likely will be replaced with a new design, with a new installation in a few years. But these kinds of differences came out, and then we discussed both in the workshop, in the roundtable, and in the dossier about how these structures are kind of affecting ecologies, different species beyond humans. Of course, how they're affecting humans. For example, from Stoke Newington in London, there was a discussion with local people, local elderly people who like didn't really know about the technology at all. What is it? Do they need it? Not necessarily. But the direct consequence for them was that the place where they used to sit by the park was taken up by these like 5 meters of different electric like cabinets or like systems that you needed in order to kind of make the network work in that area. Yeah, and actually, yeah, you can maybe see some of the titles, but you can also just go and read the issue. I think it's very kind of nice collection of ideas. And with 5G, what we also discuss is kind of all kind of conspiracy theories, which are out and about. So it's kind of one part of the one side of the phenomena, one very interesting side in a way. And then inside our group of people, we also had like techno-optimists, techno-determinists, but we also had like techno-skeptics and like people who really want to reimagine things and question, like, do we need, for example, 5G or 6G in each area of the city, or would it be possible to have like sanctuaries within cities, that in the park you might not need a network at all, or like you focus only on hospital areas, or libraries or universities and such. So this kind of, maybe we were mainly criticizing that this kind of discussion is not there. We just assume that this technology is needed everywhere. So that was one dimension, and as you can see hopefully from how I explained it very briefly, that aesthetics was actually just a way of kind of entering these very complex discussions around the technology and how it affects people. But a very different approach to many of the ways in which it is discussed. So there is something immediate if we talk about perceptions, if we talk about beauty, the very kind of weakness of aesthetics, that it's subjective, it's in the eye of the beholder. It actually can be a very strength when trying to involve people into discussions and into trying to understand what is going on. And this is an ongoing project. This is a New European Bauhaus project, Horizon funded palimpsest. It's led by Politecnico di Milano, and I'm part of the advisory board. I have been very happy to follow the process, like from the early stages of applying for funding, and now really the selection of different artistic designerly practices to kind of reinvigorate areas in cities which have been left like without attention for too long times. And it might be about industrial past, such as in the case of Woz in Poland. And then there is another place in Jerez de la Frontera in Spain, but I have been mainly focusing on this Lambro River in Milan, and how we like first had a competition, selected winners who will now workshop with the local residents in June in the Lambro River area. And really kind of trying to both gain some attention, that there is something needs to be done to the places, but also already pointing towards direction in which art and design can be part of kind of not only making problems visible, but actually solving some of the issues around the area when it comes to not only residents, but like the ecologies more broadly, and in this way linked to the broader development of the area. So this is very, very much ongoing, but I especially like how the project from the beginning has interpreted aesthetics or beauty, which is one of the kind of 3 key words of New European Bauhaus initiative, which still kind of refers very often to the direction of using art, and art is used also in this process, but it has a broader kind of take on the landscape change and the landscape kind of it comes from the landscape architecture department at the Polytechnico. So this kind of richer understanding of what contributes to aesthetics in cities. So you might want to follow the project if you are interested in this direction. Also wanted to show, I added, because I received just yesterday or today, some like the cover of the new book edited by Mark and Mark from Vienna. I had the pleasure of contributing with a chapter on aesthetic values in the maintenance of urban technologies. So the maintenance topic is something not entirely new to me. I have been interested in care, in the topic of ethics of care, aesthetics of care in the urban context. But maintenance really ties to the temporal dimension of cities. So what kind of decisions, how do you make decisions about aesthetics when thinking about maintenance, when thinking about sustaining things towards the future, or sometimes even abruptly changing them and like going into completely other kinds of directions. And we also have actually with Mark Thomas Young, the special interest group on maintenance and philosophy of technology. We have a meeting tomorrow. If anyone is interested in joining, just let me know. I can add you to the mailing list. It's fully online event. On a monthly basis, we discuss different issues around maintenance and philosophy of technology, very broadly taken. It's part of the Society for Philosophy and Technology. And then other 2 quite recent articles that I kind of discussed in the talk earlier from the Oxford Handbook of Philosophy of Technology, edited by Shannon Waller, Urban Aesthetics and Technology, just a kind of brief overview how these 2 issues link, mainly pointing towards new directions. And then in the middle, urban experience as aesthetic compromise, so more related to kind of everyday aesthetics. The edited volume by Peter Chain. And that text is actually being translated into Japanese, but now. Yeah, so if I come to conclusions and future directions, emphasizing that this is my take, someone else talking about urban aesthetics might have different ideas about the future directions, but if you trust my expertise in the field, I would say that the normative underpinnings, we still have a lot to work on those in a way. What does it entail both to the kind of practice of urban aesthetics, to the philosophical side of it, but how we can also employ this as a kind of tool or method for approaching not only other values, but other practices which have actual effect in the urban environment. So urban planning, architecture, infrastructure engineering, what does aesthetics mean in these different domains of making urban life? Urban ecologists, really like people who work on maintaining different facets of urban nature. What does it mean for our conception of urban nature? But I have kind of characterized that we need both the kind of interdisciplinary going beyond the boundaries of philosophy to a certain extent, kind of bringing and bridging aesthetics to other fields. We still need to see how aesthetic dimension kind of communicates, and this refers to the descriptive side, and how it on the other side facilitates the normative side to the development towards, first of all, just, inclusive and diversities. And this is something that I see happening in the work of Quill Kukla, for example, in the work of Robert Rosenberger. Just mentioning very few, there are others of course, but from the philosophy of the city group in a way. Then secondly, multi-species urban aesthetics. I mentioned Thea Lobo, Taylor Stone here, really kind of focusing on those sides of the ecologies, interlinked, interwoven, developing very kind of hybrid ecologies that form a very, very important part of our urban aesthetic experiences. And then thirdly, sustainable and post-carbon urban futures, of which as an example, I see the Palimpsest project, for example. And this is something that is taking place very often in connection to sustainability scientists and people who are actually kind of putting these sustainability transformations into motion. So as a final comment, what is, like I've been emphasizing throughout the talk, once more, what is valued aesthetically in the urban environment is linked to other values, to say the least. And I always kind of go towards stating even that aesthetic values really makes other values perceivable. So not only what there is to be perceived tells us about choices of other people in other times, in our times, but also what is lacking. So we also need to go into thinking and imagining further how our cities could look and feel, what kind of elements would serve the purposes of not only us, but also future generations of humans and non-humans alike. But now I only have mentions of some of the recent works which you can find on my website. Please feel free to email me if you want copies. Sometimes they are not accessible as easily as I would wish. And yes, this is where I want to end. You're very welcome to submit your articles to Philosophy of the City Journal if you work with anything that has to do with philosophy or the city. So you can see that we have a very broad scope and a very efficient and very kind of transparent and nice editorial process. It's a journal that I founded with Ryan Whittingslow from the University of Groningen. It's the official journal of our research group, and we just had our inaugural issue coming out last October. And the next issue, the deadline was just a few weeks ago, and it will be on cities at night, so nighttime cities, and it will be out in the end of the summer. Thank you so much. Thanks for your attention.